The rain hammered against the windows of the transport vehicle as I stared at the classified folder in my hands. Inside were 23 personnel files, each one stamped with red warnings that would make most commanding officers request a transfer. Psychological evaluation pending. Disciplinary action required. Unfit for standard deployment. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, and 3 hours ago, I'd been given what the Pentagon brass called a career-defining opportunity. What they really meant was career suicide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ma'am, we're approaching Camp Meridian, the driver announced, his voice cutting through the steady drumming of rain on metal. I looked up from the files to see a collection of weathered buildings sprawling across the Nevada desert. This wasn't like the pristine facilities I'd commanded before. Camp Meridian was where the military sent its broken pieces, the soldiers deemed too damaged, too volatile, or too unpredictable for regular units. The official designation was rehabilitation and reintegration facility. Everyone else called it the graveyard. As we pulled through the gates, I caught my first glimpse of what would become my unit. A group of soldiers lounged against a supply building, their uniforms disheveled, posture slouched. One was smoking despite being in clear violation of base regulations. Another had headphones in, completely oblivious to our arrival. They looked like they'd given up, on the military, on themselves, on everything. These are supposed to be soldiers? I muttered under my breath. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Yes, ma'am. The previous 3 commanders requested transfers within 6 months. Word is, these men are beyond saving. Beyond saving. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stepped out of the vehicle, my boots splashing in a puddle that reflected the gray sky above. The soldiers by the building barely acknowledged my presence. One, a tall, lean man with dead eyes, actually turned his back when he saw my insignia. I'd commanded elite units in Afghanistan, led reconnaissance missions in hostile territory, and earned more commendations than I had wall space for. But standing in that muddy courtyard, watching 23 broken soldiers pretend I didn't exist, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years of service: doubt. The administrative building was a testament to bureaucratic neglect. Paint peeled from the walls, fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, and the smell of stale coffee and resignation hung in the air like fog. Behind a dented metal desk sat Sergeant Major Torres, a weathered man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen too much and cared too little. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Commander Vasquez, he said, not bothering to stand. Welcome to the end of the world. Sergeant Major, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'd like a full briefing on the unit's current status. Torres laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. Current status? They're a disaster. Half of them show up late to formation, if they show up at all. The other half are on disciplinary probation. We've had 3 fights this month, 2 soldiers caught dealing drugs, and one who tried to go AWOL but was too drunk to make it past the gate. He pulled out a thick folder and dropped it on the desk with a thud. Here's everything you need to know. Incident reports, psychological evaluations, disciplinary actions. It's all there. I flipped through the pages, scanning names and infractions. Private Marcus Chen, anger management issues, multiple altercations. Corporal James Rivera, substance abuse, insubordination. Specialist David Kim, PTSD, refuses counseling. The list went on and on. What about their combat records? I asked. Torres raised an eyebrow. Combat records? These aren't combat soldiers, Commander. They're washouts. Everyone here has a service record, Sergeant Major. I want to see them all. He shrugged and pulled out another set of files. Knock yourself out. What I found in those files changed everything. Marcus Chen had been a decorated sniper with over 40 confirmed kills before a roadside bomb took out half his squad. James Rivera had led rescue missions in urban combat zones before his commanding officer was killed in an ambush he blamed himself for. David Kim had been a communications specialist who'd kept his unit connected during a 3-day siege, saving dozens of lives. These weren't washouts. They were heroes who'd been broken by war and abandoned by a system that didn't know how to fix them. I want to address the unit, I said, Closing the files, Torres checked his watch. They're supposed to be at evening formation in 20 minutes. Supposed to be. I'd say you've got a 50-50 chance of getting half of them to show up. Then we'll start with whoever comes. The formation area was a patch of cracked concrete behind the barracks. At 1800 hours, 12 soldiers stood in. Something resembling a line. The rest were nowhere to be found. Those who did show up looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I walked to the front of the formation, my heels clicking against the concrete. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the evening stillness. Good evening, I began. A few mumbled responses. Most remained silent. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, and as of today, I'm your new commanding officer. I know what you're thinking, another officer here to whip you into shape before requesting a transfer when things get difficult. I'm not here to do that. I paused, letting my words sink in. I've read your files. All of them. Not just the disciplinary reports, but your service records. I know what you've done, what you've been through, what you've lost. And I'm here to tell you that you are not broken. You are not washouts. You are not beyond saving. Private Chen, the sniper with dead eyes, actually looked at me for the first time. You are warriors who've been told you're worthless. But I see something different. I see potential that's been buried under pain and anger and grief. I see soldiers who could be extraordinary if given the right mission and the right leadership. Specialist Kim, the communications expert, shifted uncomfortably but didn't look away. I'm not asking you to trust me. Trust is earned. But I am asking you to give me 30 days. 30 days to show you what you're really capable of. 30 days to prove that the army hasn't given up on you, even if you've given up on yourselves. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, from somewhere in the back, Corporal Rivera spoke up. What makes you think you can succeed where 3 other commanders failed? It was a fair question. I looked him directly in the eyes. Because I'm not here to command you, I said. I'm here to lead you. And there's a difference. I dismissed the formation and watched as the soldiers dispersed, some heading to the chow hall, others back to their barracks. A few lingered, shooting glances in my direction. They were curious now, maybe even slightly hopeful. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, I sat in my quarters, a sparse room with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the desert, and planned my approach. Traditional military discipline wouldn't work here. These men had been through too much, seen too much, lost too much. They needed something different. They needed to remember why they'd become soldiers in the first place. I thought about my own journey, the moment I decided to join the military. I was 18, fresh out of high school, with no clear direction in life. My older brother had been killed in a car accident, and I was drowning in grief and anger. The recruiter had told me the army would give me purpose, teach me discipline, make me part of something bigger than myself. He'd been right. The military had saved me, given me structure and meaning when I needed it most. Maybe I could do the same for these soldiers. Outside my window, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly. Under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in those barracks were 23 broken men who'd once been heroes. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reminding them what they were capable of, but first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I pulled out the incident reports Torres had given me and began reading. The picture they painted was bleak. In the past 6 months, there had been 14 fights, 6 drug-related incidents, and countless instances of insubordination. The previous commander had instituted a system of punitive measures, extra duty, restricted privileges, punitive exercises, that had only made things worse. What struck me was the pattern. The incidents weren't random acts of rebellion. They were cries for help from men who felt forgotten and discarded. Every fight seemed to stem from frustration. Every instance of substance abuse was an attempt to numb pain that no one seemed to care about addressing. These soldiers weren't acting out because they were bad. They were acting out because they were human beings in pain, and pain demands expression. One way or another. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, 2,230 hours. Late for a social call. Enter, I called. The door opened to reveal Sergeant Major Torres, looking even more tired than he had earlier. Commander, he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. We need to talk. Of course. Have a seat. He remained standing, his posture stiff with tension. With respect, ma'am, you don't know what you're getting into with these men. I've been here for 3 years. I've watched good officers come through here with high ideals and big plans. They all leave broken or bitter or both. What exactly are you trying to tell me, Sergeant Major? I'm telling you to be careful. Some of these soldiers, they're dangerous. Chen nearly killed a man in a bar fight 6 months ago. Rivera's been caught with enough drugs to suggest he's dealing. Kim hasn't spoken to anyone in weeks, and when he does talk, it's to himself. These aren't just damaged soldiers, Commander. They're time bombs. I studied Torres carefully. There was genuine concern in his voice, but also something else. Fear, maybe. Or perhaps resignation so deep it had become indistinguishable from despair. Sergeant Major, what did you do before? You came to Camp Meridian? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I was a drill instructor at Fort Benning for 12 years. Before that, infantry in Iraq and Afghanistan. Good assignments. Prestigious postings. What brought you here? Torres's jaw tightened. I requested the transfer. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at a point somewhere over my shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My son was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago. IED outside Kandahar. He was 23 years old, had been in country for 6 months. After the funeral, I couldn't keep training kids to go over there and die. I needed something different. Something that felt like it mattered. And you found that here? Torres laughed, that same bitter sound I'd heard earlier. I found nothing here, Commander. These soldiers are too broken to fix, and the system doesn't care enough to try. It's just a place to warehouse problems until they become someone else's responsibility. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the barracks where my soldiers were sleeping. Sergeant Major, do you know what the most dangerous thing is for a soldier? Enemy fire? No. It's losing hope. Because once a soldier loses hope, he stops being a soldier. He becomes a liability to himself and everyone around him. I turned back to Torres. These men haven't lost their skills or their training or even their courage. They've lost their hope. And maybe you have too. Torres's face hardened. Hope is a luxury we can't afford here, Commander. Hope is the only thing we can afford, Sergeant Major. Without it, we're just going through the motions until our tours end. After Torres left, I couldn't sleep. I found myself thinking about the faces I'd seen during formation, the mixture of anger, pain, and resignation that seemed to define every man in this unit. Tomorrow would begin what I suspected would be the most challenging assignment of my career, but as I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking about something my first commanding officer had told me years ago. The measure of a leader isn't how well they command the best soldiers. It's how they inspire the worst ones to become better. I'd built my career commanding elite units filled with motivated, disciplined soldiers. Now I was being asked to prove myself with men who'd been written off by everyone else. The next morning would mark the beginning of either my greatest success or my most spectacular failure. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to give up on these soldiers, even if they'd given up on themselves. The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, echoing across Camp Meridian like a death knell. I stood outside the barracks, clipboard in hand, watching as soldiers stumbled out in various states of undress and attitude. Some were clearly hungover. Others looked like they hadn't slept at all. Formation in 10 minutes, I announced. Full gear. Groans and muttered complaints filled the morning air. By 05:15, I had exactly 8 soldiers standing in something resembling formation. The rest were still inside, either ignoring the order or moving with deliberate slowness to show their defiance. This was my second day at Camp Meridian, and I was about to implement the first phase of what I privately called Operation Resurrection. Where is everyone else? I asked Corporal Rivera, the one with substance abuse issues, shrugged. Probably sleeping off hangovers, ma'am. It's what we do here. Not anymore. I turned to Sergeant Major Torres, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. Sergeant Major, please escort me to the barracks. We walked through the building methodically. I found Private Chen sitting on his bunk, fully dressed but reading a paperback novel. Specialist Kim was staring at the ceiling, earbuds in, completely motionless. Private Rodriguez was indeed hungover, clutching his head like it might explode. Gentlemen, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, you have 60 seconds to get outside in formation, or we're going to have a problem. What kind of problem? Chen asked without looking up from his book. I smiled, not the warm, encouraging kind of smile, but the one that had made insurgents think twice about their life choices. The kind where I make your current misery look like a vacation. 55 seconds later, all 23 soldiers stood outside in the worst formation I'd ever seen. But they were there. Today marks the beginning of your real military service, I announced. Not the kind where you go through the motions and collect a paycheck. The kind where you remember why you took an oath to serve your country. I pulled out a thick folder and began reading names. Private Marcus Chen. 2 tours in Afghanistan. 43 confirmed kills as a designated marksman. Saved 17 lives during the siege of FOB Chapman. Chen's book slipped from his hands. Corporal James Rivera. Led evacuation operations in Fallujah. Single-handedly coordinated the rescue of 32 civilians from a collapsed building under enemy fire. Rivera's slouched posture straightened slightly. Specialist David Kim. Maintained communications for a forward operating base for 72 hours while under siege. His coordination efforts saved an entire battalion from being overrun. Kim pulled out his earbuds for the first time since I'd arrived. I continued down the line, reading accomplishments that painted a picture not of broken soldiers, but of heroes who'd been forgotten. With each name, each citation, each act of courage I recounted, the formation grew straighter. Eyes that had been vacant began to focus. Shoulders that had been slumped with defeat began to square. These are your real service records, I said. When I finished. Not the disciplinary actions or the psychological evaluations. This is who you were before the system decided you were broken. Private Rodriguez, still battling his hangover, raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, if we were so good, why are we here? It was the question I'd been waiting for. Because war breaks people, I said simply. Not because they're weak, but because they're human. You've seen things, done things, lost things that most people can't even imagine. The difference between you and the soldiers in regular units isn't that you're damaged goods. It's that you've been through hell and survived. That makes you rare. That makes you valuable. I paused, looking each man in the eyes. But right now, you're wasting that experience feeling sorry for yourselves. Today, that ends. The training I implemented wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of traditional military exercises designed to break down and rebuild, I focused on rediscovering strengths. We started with marksmanship, where Chen's natural abilities quickly became apparent. His first target looked like it had been hit by a machine gun programmed for precision. Damn, Chen, Rivera muttered, examining the target. I forgot you could shoot like that. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw Chen smile. Next came tactical communications, where Kim's expertise shone. I watched him set up a complex radio array in half the time it should have taken, his hands moving with muscle memory that hadn't been lost despite months of disuse. Kim, I said as he fine-tuned the frequencies, I need someone to train the others on advanced comm protocols. Interested? He looked up, surprised. You want me to teach? I want you to lead. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. There were setbacks. Rodriguez showed up drunk to formation 3 days later. Kim had a panic attack during a night exercise. Rivera got into a fight with another soldier over something trivial, but each time someone stumbled, the others were there to catch them. Chen helped Rodriguez with his drinking problem, sharing his own struggles with alcohol after losing his squad. Kim found solace in teaching others, discovering that helping his fellow soldiers cope gave him purpose. Rivera channeled his anger into protective instincts, becoming the unit's unofficial guardian. 2 weeks into the program, I received my first challenge from outside Camp Meridian. General Morrison, the base commander, visited unannounced during morning PT. Commander Vasquez, he said, watching my soldiers run an obstacle course with enthusiasm I hadn't seen in any previous reports. I've been hearing interesting things about your unit. Good things, I hope, sir. Unexpected things. Your predecessor reported this unit as a complete loss. Recommended disbanding and reassigning the personnel to non-combat roles. I watched as Chen helped Rodriguez over a wall he was struggling with, then as Kim coordinated the entire squad through a communication exercise that had them moving like a real military unit. Sir, with respect, I think the previous assessment was premature. General. Morrison observed quietly for another 10 minutes. Then he turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. "I have a proposition for you, Commander. There's a joint training exercise scheduled for next month. Elite units from across the country will be participating. I want your soldiers there." "Sir? Call it a field test. If your unit can perform at the level of regular military units, I'll consider expanding your program to other rehabilitation facilities. If they fail..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. That evening, I gathered the unit in the common area of their barracks. The atmosphere was different now. Instead of the sullen resignation I'd encountered on my first day, there was an energy in the room. Not quite hope yet, but something close to it. "Gentlemen, I have an announcement. We've been invited to participate in a joint training exercise with some of the military's best units." The room went silent. "They want to see if rehabilitation soldiers can perform at elite levels," I continued. "This is our chance to prove that you're not broken. That you're not washouts. That you belong." Rodriguez raised his hand. "Ma'am, what if we fail? What if we embarrass ourselves?" "Then we fail together," I said. "But I don't think that's going to happen." The next 3 weeks were the most intense training period of my military career. We worked 18-hour days, pushing physical limits and rebuilding tactical skills that had been dormant for months. The soldiers threw themselves into the preparation with a dedication that reminded me why they'd been special forces in the first place. Chen redesigned our marksmanship training, incorporating lessons learned from his combat experience. Kim developed communication protocols that were more advanced than anything in the standard military handbook. Rivera created hand-to-hand combat scenarios based on real urban warfare situations, but more importantly, they began functioning as a unit again. The isolation and individual suffering that had defined their time at Camp Meridian gave way to mutual support and shared purpose. The day of the exercise arrived with typical Nevada heat. 5 units had been assembled for the competition: an Army Ranger squad, a Navy SEAL team, a Marine reconnaissance unit, an Air Force Special Operations group, and US.AS. We arrived at the staging area. I could see the other units sizing us up. We didn't look like elite soldiers. Our gear was standard issue, our uniforms weren't as crisp, and our bearings still carried traces of the broken men they'd been. The exercise commander, Colonel Harrison, briefed all units on the scenario: a hostage rescue operation in an urban environment with multiple hostile forces and civilian complications. Points would be awarded for speed, accuracy, tactical innovation, and protection of non-combatants. "May the best unit win," he concluded. The Rangers went first, executing a textbook assault that was efficient and professional. Time, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. No casualties, all hostages rescued. The SEALs were next, using advanced techniques that shaved 2 minutes off the Rangers' time while demonstrating superior coordination. The Marines approached the problem differently, using suppressive fire and aggressive movement that was impressive to watch but resulted in 1 simulated civilian casualty. The Air Force team employed technological solutions that were elegant and effective, though their time was slightly slower than the SEALs. Then it was our turn. As we approached the staging area, I could hear comments from the other units. "Who are these guys? Never seen that unit designation before. They look like rejects." I gathered my soldiers in a huddle. "Remember who you are," I said quietly. "Remember what you've done. Remember what you're capable of." Chen nodded, checking his rifle one final time. "We've got this, ma'am." The scenario began with a simulated explosion. My unit moved with precision that surprised everyone watching. Kim coordinated movement and communications flawlessly, keeping every member of the team connected and informed. Chen eliminated simulated hostiles with shots that were impossibly accurate. Rivera cleared rooms with efficiency that spoke to years of urban combat experience, but what set them apart wasn't just their individual skills, it was how they worked together. They moved like a single organism, each soldier anticipating the other's actions with supernatural precision. When Rodriguez took simulated fire, Chen provided cover while Kim repositioned the team to maintain tactical advantage. When a civilian simulation became complicated, Rivera adapted instantly, protecting non-combatants while maintaining mission focus. They completed the exercise in 9 minutes, 43 seconds. 0 casualties. All hostages rescued. No civilian losses. The staging area fell silent as the time was announced. Colonel Harrison approached me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Commander, I need to see the service records for your unit." "Of course, sir." As he reviewed the files, his expression changed from confusion to understanding to something approaching awe. "These men are all combat veterans with distinguished service records," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "And they were assigned to a rehabilitation facility?" "They were considered too damaged for regular service, sir." Colonel Harrison looked back at my soldiers, who were now being approached by members of the other elite units with obvious respect and curiosity. "Commander, I think the military owes these men an apology." 3 months later, I stood in the same courtyard where I'd first addressed 23 broken soldiers. But the men standing before me now bore no resemblance to the defeated group I'd encountered. They stood tall, their uniforms crisp, their bearing proud. More importantly, their eyes held something that had been missing for too long: purpose. General Morrison was present for the ceremony, along with several other high-ranking officials who'd come to witness what was already being called the Meridian Miracle. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general announced, "it gives me great pleasure to recognize the first graduating class of the Advanced Combat Rehabilitation Program. These soldiers have not only proven that recovery is possible, but that those who've been broken can become stronger at the mended places." One by one, I watched as my soldiers received new assignments. Chen was being transferred to a sniper school as an instructor. Kim had been recruited by Special Operations Command for his communications expertise. Rivera was joining an elite urban warfare training unit. As the ceremony concluded, Sergeant Major Torres approached me. He looked different too. The resignation and bitterness had been replaced by something I hadn't seen in him before: pride. "Commander," he said, "I owe you an apology. And more than that, I owe you thanks." "For what, Sergeant Major?" "For reminding me why I became a soldier in the first place. And for showing me that hope isn't a luxury. It's a necessity." He paused, looking out at the soldiers who were saying their goodbyes, making plans to stay in touch, promising to support each other in their new assignments. "I've put in for a transfer," he said, "to instructor duty. Figured it was time to start building soldiers up instead of just watching them waste away." 6 months later, I received letters from 19 of my former soldiers. Chen had earned commendations as an instructor and was being considered for special assignment. Kim had developed new communication protocols that were being adopted army-wide. Rivera had been selected for a special operations unit and was already distinguishing himself in training. The program I'd started at Camp Meridian had been expanded to 12 facilities across the country. Hundreds of soldiers who'd been written off as damaged goods were being given second chances to serve with honor, but the letter that meant the most came from Rodriguez, who'd struggled the most with alcohol and had the hardest time finding his footing. "Commander," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that I just completed my first mission with my new unit. It went perfectly, and I kept thinking about what you told us that first day, that we weren't broken, just human. You were right. We were never broken. We just needed someone to believe in us again. Thank you for seeing what we couldn't see in ourselves." As I read the letter, I thought about a conversation I'd had with my own mentor years earlier, after a particularly difficult assignment. "How do you know when you've succeeded as a leader?" I'd asked. "When the people you've led no longer need you to lead them," she'd replied. I looked out my office window at the new group of soldiers arriving at Camp Meridian, 25 men and women, who'd been told they were beyond saving. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of proving that assessment wrong, because I'd learned something important during my time with those first 23 soldiers: there's no such thing as a broken warrior. There are only warriors who've forgotten their strength. My job wasn't to fix them. It was to remind them who they'd always been, and in doing so, I discovered something about myself as well. I'd spent my career commanding elite soldiers who were already motivated and disciplined. But the real test of leadership wasn't inspiring the best soldiers to be better. It was helping the fallen remember how to stand. In the end, they hadn't just become elite warriors again. They'd become something more: proof that redemption is possible, that second chances matter, and that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been broken and chose to rebuild themselves. The military had handed me their broken soldiers, expecting me to warehouse them until they became someone else's problem. Instead, I'd helped them forge themselves into something the institution had never seen before, warriors who understood both strength and vulnerability, who could fight with courage because they'd already survived their darkest moments. They were elite not despite their brokenness, but because of what they'd learned in putting themselves back together, and that, I realized, was the most valuable lesson of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.